So you may be missing out on one of the best farms of Season 7 of Diablo 4, and this is going to take place in the new Roothold dungeon. So in this video, I want to go over a full guide on how these work and how to most efficiently farm these. Now, Rootholds are a new mini dungeon that were introduced with Season 7, and you need a key, more specifically you need a Whispering Wood to be able to enter these. And you can farm Whispering Woods from either opening up your Whisper caches or looting and opening up silent chests anywhere in the open world. So make sure to go and use your obols to stock up on Whispering Keys anytime you're going to be farming in the open world, because that just gives you more chances of getting these Whispering Wood. And once you have them, they work in the exact same ways in Nightmare Dungeon Sigil. You just use it and it will allow you to teleport to that dungeon. And while there are multiple different versions of these Rootholds as their own separate dungeons in different areas of the world, that's not going to change up the loot you're going to be getting out of them. Now, once you enter a Roothold, you're going to have 4 different options of buffs and debuffs to choose between. So you choose one, it'll give you a debuff, and then it will also give you a buff. Now, there's only 3 different buffs I've seen. I don't think there are any other ones, and these buffs are either to get another root in the next area or to get a minor or major reward. Now, the minor and major rewards are a very big augment to how this dungeon is actually going to work, because if you go in these Rootholds and say don't choose any buff or just choose to get another root, you'll notice that when you go and click on these roots, which is the main objective of the dungeon, it will spew out a bunch of primarily resources, gold, crafting materials, and things like that. You will rarely get a piece of gear, and it'll just primarily be the more low tier resources. And then if you choose a minor reward, it seems to give a bit more resources. It has a chance to give maybe a couple additional pieces of gear, and it usually seems to also try to give you some higher tier resources. But where this dungeon gets actually crazy is when you start to get the major reward buffs, because these turn the roots into just little loot piles that give you a bunch of resources to spewing out massive amounts of actual gear, and not only just legendary gear, but you'll notice you'll be getting a lot of greater affix gear and a lot of unique drops. I've gone through one of these dungeons and gotten like 4 uniques because I got the major reward option. Now, you won't always get an option for a major reward buff. I've gone through these dungeons and gone through the 2 sets of buffs you get to choose between and not gotten any major buff. So that's the first thing you're going to be doing when you get in the dungeon. Make sure to just go for the major buffs, then go for the minor buffs. Then if you don't have any more options, you're obviously going to be choosing a route, and you get to choose 2 out of the 4 buffs on the first stage of the dungeon. Then you go in, and the main objective will be to just go and click on a certain amount of routes. Once you're done with that, you'll get to the next section, and you'll be able to choose 2 out of 3 buffs for the next section of the dungeon, and they work in the exact same way. Just try to do the same thing. The major buffs are gonna be the things that absolutely juice up these dungeons. And then you go into the next section, you do the same thing, you loot a certain amount of these routes, and then that takes you to the boss at the end. And the boss at the end is also one of the head rotten bosses, so they can also have one of the escaped heads on top of them. Now, that's a good segue into some of the other things you can find within these dungeons, and those are Forgotten Altars and Fugitive Heads. And these are 2 of the more rare, much more important pieces of progression in this season. And not only are you able to find these in these Roothold dungeons, but you can also use the new season-specific elixir called the Drought of Whispers to get an even higher chance. Now, if you don't know how all of the percentages of finding these altars and fugitive heads work, the base scaling of finding them comes from the difficulty you're in. So starting on Torment 1, you'll have a 1% chance to find a Forgotten Altar in any dungeons. So that's any Nightmare dungeons or any of the Rootholds, and you have a 4% chance to find a boss with a fugitive head on it, either from headhunts or within these Rootholds. Now, that's on Torment 1, and this goes up to Torment 4. So on Torment 4, you have a 5% chance for the altars in dungeons and a 10% chance for the heads in headhunts or Rootholds. You can then also use the Drought of Whispers, which will double the chance shown on the Torment difficulty. So if you use a Drought of Whispers in Torment 4, you'll now have a 10% chance for altars and a 20% chance to get the fugitive heads. And both of these things being incredibly rare this season, legitimately some of the rarest things to actually progress through with this season, doing these Rootholds is really good for this. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's no other area in this season where you can both get Fugitive Heads and Forgotten Altars. So that just further increases how lucrative these Rootholds actually are. And on top of all of this, Rootholds do also seem to be the best place to get the Restless Rot to upgrade your witch powers and craft your occult gems. The enemies in here just seem to drop a lot more Restless Rot. It may also be that all enemies in here are head rotten, and if you say go to a headhunt, not all of the enemies in a headhunt are actually head rotten, so a lot of the enemies you're running around killing may not actually have a chance to drop it when in headhunts. So it just seems to be a much more consistent way to get the rot, but obviously these Rootholds are going to require a key, so they should be pretty juiced. So if you're trying to farm these Rootholds, your gameplay loop is going to be to go to a headhunt and complete all of the whispers you possibly can to get the caches to try to get keys out of those. And while you're doing that, make sure you have whispering keys on you, because there are usually a lot of silent chests throughout these headhunts. So you'll be able to double up on trying to get more of these Whisperwood keys. Once you have some of these keys, you're going to make sure to have your Drought Hub Whispers on, and then you're just going to go farm those. Make sure you go to the highest torment difficulty you could possibly do at that point. Keep in mind not to make it too hard, because you do have a limited amount of lives for a Roothold run. And then once you're in there, you're going to want to choose the major buffs anytime you're given the option, and then the minor buffs. And if you don't have enough of those options, then you pick up one of the additional root buffs. But the additional root buffs don't seem to be super good. But that's pretty much all you're going to need to farm these Rootholds as efficiently as possible. And these things are absolutely juiced if you haven't been doing them. You will very commonly come out with more than a full inventory of loot, and that's on top of being able to get all that Restless Rot. That's on top of being able to get Forgotten Altars, Fugitive Heads, and also seeming to have a pretty good unique and greater FX drop rate once you get those major reward buffs. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.